Okay, I think we are live. Welcome to our 11 Days of Global Unity special panel on freedom, with the focus on political polarization and the future of freedom and democracy. My name is Rick Ulfik, and I'm the founder of We the World and the We campaign at we.net. And I'm the co-creator of 11 Days of Global Unity with my dear friend, Troy Lush. We got a bunch of global partners together about 17 years ago. In fact, exactly 17 years ago, 2004. So this is our 17th anniversary. You can find out about all the 11 Days of Global Unity broadcasts and events by going to we.net and see our recordings, and go to our YouTube channel for recordings and broadcasts as well, which is youtube.com/wetheworld.org. And we invite you to collaborate with us as a volunteer or an organization partner as well. Just go to we.net. Also, if you're watching this live on Facebook, please put your comments or questions in the comment area as you're watching, and we will try to monitor and respond to them during this broadcast now if we can. Today, we're excited to have with us Kurt Johnson, John Steiner, Michael Wayne, and Bob Atkinson. We are all part of the Evolutionary Leaders Bridging Synergy Circle, which Kurt Johnson can tell us about in a moment. Dr. Kurt Johnson is a dear friend and close collaborator with We the World for decades. He has worked in professional science and comparative religion for over 40 years and serves on many international committees, but particularly at the UN. And as part of Unity Earth, he co-edits its magazines, The Convergence and Light on Light, and co-hosts its Convergence series on the Voice America Radio Network. Welcome to the broadcast, Kurt Johnson.
Well, Rick, thank you so much. And thank you and welcome everybody to this program from the Bridging Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. Now, let me just say just a little bit about the Evolutionary Leaders, who you can find at evolutionaryleaders.net. This is a group of over 200 thought leaders from all around the world that have been together for over a decade, addressing issues of moment from all of the energy they can bring from their work and being as well known as many of them are. And the group is probably most well known this year for the book, Our Moment of Choice, Evolutionary Visions and Hope for the Future, which won a Gold Nautilus Award, a COVR Visionary Award, New York Book Festival Gold Medal, and a Gold Now Living Award. And it's very much about all the themes that we're talking about today. So the Evolutionary Leaders have more than a dozen thematic synergy circles, which is the way that they bring their activism to the world. Examples would be social justice, climate change, everything imaginable, education, biocultural sacred sites, consciousness, and on and on. And this is the Bridging Circle. Now, the Bridging Circle was formed right after the January 6th insurrection incident at the Capitol, where so many people, including so many evolutionary leaders, were concerned about the direction that things were going and may well continue to go in this country and around the world because of the divide that's in people's minds about what stories they believe, what their worldview is, what their values are, and so on. So 20 evolutionary leaders, including all that are on this broadcast, came together to form that circle. There is a web page. It's at community.contemplativelife.org/bridging-circle. To say that once more, community.contemplativelife.org/ bridging-circle. And you can easily have access to that page by just going to contemplativelife.org and pressing on communities, joining for free. When you come into communities, you'll see an icon for the bridging circle. It has a bridge. You can't miss it. And that way you can join and have access to all of our information. So just to wrap up before we go ahead, this group has done two previous major events. Right after the January 6th insurrection in March, we did a special program on Voice America, centering on the documentary film and book, The Reunited States of America, with Mark Gershon and Van Jones and Ben Reiki and other commentaries on exactly this issue of the direction the divisions in our country are going. And you can find that just by Googling The Convergence at Voice America. That's The Convergence at Voice America, and just choosing it from the episode menu. And we'll actually post this later as well. That program was called Our Moment of Choice, Atlas Hugged or Atlas Shrugged, Part 1. And then in June, we followed with another program for World Unity Week, in which we actually presented a further discussion of this issue and the video from the audio program that had been done with Voice America, so people could actually see the people talking and not just hear the soundtrack. And there is a permanent link for that at Facebook, which doesn't do me much good to say here, but I will be giving that to Rick, and we'll also be keeping those things posted at the Bridging Circle webpage. So just as a last note, the next issue of Light on Light magazine will actually have the links for all of the programs that were ever done during World Unity Week. And maybe we'll be talking to Rick and adding to those, major programs also from the 11 Days of Unity, so that they're there in perpetuity for people to link into. So thanks for much listening to that starting off information. I'll pass it back to Rick now, and we can move on with the program.
Okay, well, thank you, Kurt. That was a great overview of what's happening with Evolutionary Leaders, Synergy Circle, and all of that. So, so now I'd like to give a little context for our conversation. Today's topic is very important to me and to others on this panel today. So I'm really disturbed about trends that I see in the US, the dangerous erosion of freedom and democracy, leading to what we see a bit of now, but it could get worse, minority rule, with gerrymandering, where the politicians are choosing the voters instead of the voters choosing the politicians. We have voter suppression, the problems with the inequities of the electoral college, which gives equal weight to states that have much smaller populations, the unlimited money in politics, the Senate, where now we have 41 senators that represent only 21% of the country. Those 41 senators, through the filibuster, can block legislation that large majorities of people want and need for their families and communities. We have minority communities like Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander. They continue to have voting restrictions placed on them. The views and wishes of elected officials who represent a minority of people are being reflected in many of the laws and policies that a majority of people strongly disagree with and that do not generally serve the common good. So a majority of people would like to get big money out of politics and tax the wealthiest corporations and individuals, but a minority of people are making it so that those kinds of things don't happen. Gun safety laws, like universal background checks. A large majority of people, Democrats and Republicans, want that, and it's not happening. Healthcare for all, like single payer, ending offshore oil and gas drilling. There is a long list of issues that are not happening because of this sort of disruption or inequity in our freedom and democracy. So some people feel that this is getting so bad that the US might be only 2 national elections away from losing even what we have now in our freedom and democracy. So as we open this up to everyone, there are 3 questions that we'd like to address, and of course, bring in anything else that anyone thinks about. One is any thoughts that you have, comments about what happened on January 6th. And yesterday, September 18th, was a march in Washington, D.C., supporting those who participated in January 6th. So any thoughts on that? What are the implications for freedom and democracy and their effect on issues such as the climate crisis if the current levels of political polarization persist? What will be the effect going forward if we continue to have these high levels of political polarization? And then the last question is, what are possible strategies that you and we and us all collectively can use to address this? So to jump to our first person who will be talking about these things, John Steiner is a networker, transpartisan leader in terms of bridging the divides, and creative consultant, often with his wife and working partner, Margot King. John Steiner is one of the national leaders of the current effort to take the transpartisan movement to scale. Welcome to the broadcast, John Steiner. I think you're on mute. The 4 most used words since COVID began. You are on mute.
Unmute your phones.
Hi,
Rick,
John.
thank you for the panelists, and mostly thank you for whoever is watching this. And it's a little challenging to know who we're speaking to, but I'm going to make some assumptions. And the first assumption I'm going to make is, which I'm going to open myself up here. What I'm going to choose to do is speak to what I think the good news is in terms of bridging divides and how we can solve some of the great issues that we're facing, including this move toward authoritarian government in this country and around the world. So I'm going to basically just list a bunch of organizations and people who I think are some of our best and give us encouragement. And I've got a whole list with websites and so forth. So if you don't want to write down everything that I'm saying and you want to get anything that I'm saying, my email address is Steiner, STEINER_King @earthlink.net. And just put, what's the name of our gathering today, Rick?
It's called 11 Days Global Unity, 11 Days of Global Unity Summit Panel on Freedom.
So let's just do 11 Days of Global Unity on Freedom, and I'll make a list of people who want to get this and then get back to you. So I'm just going to, in my time, I'm just going to move forward. There are a number of groups, and a lot of you will know about this, and most of this is United States based. Whether it's ranked choice voting, open primaries, felons voting, dealing with corruption, There are a number of organizations working on this under the rubric of NANNER, the Nonpartisan Reformers Organization. That's NANAR. And the primary group that's overseeing a lot of this is Represent.us. On the legal front, there's a lot of work going on to try to push back against this, quote, Republican authoritarian assault on our freedoms. One of the ones that we're particularly enamored of is just called protectdemocracy.org. Many of you know about the Brennan Center for Justice. And just recently, there's something called the Election Official Legal Defense Network, which is going to support our nonpartisan electors who are sometimes being overwhelmed by partisan laws in red states to take elections out of nonpartisanship. The other thing that's very obvious here, particularly in non-red states, but even in red states, is how important our secretaries of state are to kind of do what's right and do what's law-abiding. So if you're in this country, find out who your Secretary of State is and support them. One of the interesting conservative groups working on money and politics is called Take Back Our Republic. And then a fascinating new effort that some of you may know about that's just emerged in the last few months is called the Renew America Movement. And this is started by a group of Republicans, but they see themselves as being Renew American Republicans and Democrats and independents who really put country and ideology, or party, put country before party and ideology. And they want to, try to keep some of the non-insurrectionist Republicans in Congress and support Democrats. And you can learn more about that. Again, as we know, probably 70% of this country is what has been called the exhausted majority. People who do not cater to the polarization and anger and vitriol that's going on in the country. There are 3 extraordinary organizations that are polling groups that are essentially letting us know that this group of people exists. One is called More in Common. They work in the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. Stephen Cull does something called Public Consultation. His organization is called Voice of the People. He has done any number of polls, probably on 20 issues, showing how much Americans agree and want to work together. And then lastly, Will Friedman, who runs the Public Agenda Foundation, runs an effort called The Hidden Common Ground, in which he's been reporting his work with USA Today. One of the important groups getting Americans of different political stripes to talk to each other across divides is called America Talks. I could go on, and I'm happy to, but I'm going to hit the pause button there and perhaps say more when we do our panel discussion. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. That was fabulous. What a wonderful compendium of resources that you gave. And if anyone just goes back to this recording, they can get it all that way as well. So that's fabulous.
Rick, if I put, I'm not sure I can get all of the URLs in the chat. That can't go back in the recording, can it?
No, but we can save the chat and make it as a resource, I guess.
Yeah, I'll send you these URLs, and then you can figure out what to do with it.
But okay. you gave your email address, which is great. So this way people can connect with you. I'm a little
cautious of doing that, but here we are. Okay.
All right. Next. So, okay, let's bring Kurt back. And Kurt, I already introduced you, but I know that you are very much keyed into current events. I, on a regular basis, get a lot of my news from you as well as other news sources. So thank you for that. And any comments that you would like to make?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. Yeah, I'm really glad that John started out with those positive points, and I'm going to revert to some also. But the first thing I want to do is just make some general statements about the difficulty that we're in. And that I think everybody needs to realize without papering it over, that we have had in this country ever since the Civil War, and because of our heritage with regard to white supremacy and the supremacy of the rich, we've had all kinds of ways that participation by minorities, persons of color, and other groups was successfully repressed for decades. You go through Jim Crow, you go through segregation, you go through the whole list. And that was working until about 5-8 years ago, where not only because of the continuing of the browning of America and the white group becoming actually eventually the minority, it became very apparent that the usual ways for keeping those disparities there were not working. So all of us saw then this change in those particular groups, and now enfranchised, unfortunately, in the mainstream of the Republican Party, that it's very clear now that we have a major party in our country that, in order to preserve white supremacy, supremacy of the rich, and that type of plutocracy and autocracy, they are not interested in democracy because it no longer works for them. And to be very blunt, it's very clear they are ready to go to authoritarianism and to dictatorship to preserve those social values, which are white supremacy, supremacy of the rich, and those ruled by the privileged groups. And that's become more and more overt and was triggered by President Trump tearing down every norm that was there that was not enforced by some type of law. So you then got this situation where the Constitution could be subverted without breaking a law, because we have not been careful about moving constitutional law to statutory law. So these people could hide behind, oh, there was no law that was broken, and that's true. So to point out that Stephen Breyer, Justice of the Supreme Court, was on CNN today. He just wrote a book on these trends and what's also happened in the courts. And he said his fear now is that where voting is going, it's actually going to go where Trump wanted it to go, that it can be thrown back to the states. And no matter who wins the popular vote in that state, the state legislatures will pick the electors who then select the president. And that's perfectly legal. It's perfectly legal in the Constitution for any state. It already does say in our Constitution that the state legislature chooses the electors, but the tradition has always been that that reflected the popular vote. All these legislatures have to do in the red states is enfranchise that into written law, that they have the right to choose the electors no matter where the popular vote goes. And then we're going to be back in a situation very similar to what some states were in actually before the Civil War. So we just have to realize this, there's this danger that we have a major political party that is quite willing to sacrifice democracy as we've known it in order to get the social norms that they want. We also saw that now with the choice law in Texas with regard to Roe v. Wade. And there again, the Supreme Court did nothing. So then if every state did that, Pennsylvania already did it, but they have a Democratic governor and he vetoed it just a few days ago. But we could also go that direction where there's no way to stop this and no law was broken. So that's the general trend that is so scary historically. Second thing I want to say very briefly is about September 18th, just yesterday. And don't be fooled by thinking that this fizzled, because what we see from bullies is bullies always back up when they think there may be some danger, and then they work, below the surface. So that small turnout was basically because the politicians on the red state side, who were so afraid of being too obvious that they want to dump democracy. They can't be too obvious. So they're as obvious as they can be. But it was made so clear before yesterday that it would not be useful for them to show up. So they went back to then working then, below the surface and undercover and so on. And I don't say this to create hyperbole, and I don't say it to actually launch some type of a conspiracy theory, but you have to realize that that's how this works. And the very fact that it didn't seem like a good venue for them yesterday also is the reason they showed up. The second thing about yesterday and January 6th is that there's this very scary parallel to Germany in the 30s. And that is, we saw from January 6th that all the wackadoodles in the world get out there with their homemade weapons and whatever it may be and start beating up on people. And what went on January 6th is so similar to what was going on in Germany in the 30s. And that can be used to upset a norm in a country and move it in another direction. So we really just need to recognize that. Just two more points before I close out, because we were asked about hope for the future. I think we really have to get our younger people and our youth, our people who are growing up, educated that the situation of our country with democracy is not what it used to be. It is truly teetering on the brink of having the norms being taken away, even without any statutory law being broken. I think that's really important. Last thing I want to say is on the positive side, just so that you'll know, all over the world now, sociologists and academics are talking about the future of governance on our planet. And they're actually comparing systems as tight systems and loose systems. And what they say is just so true. America is a loose system where we have all of these freedoms, but we're not good when something comes up that requires us to be tight. So COVID comes up, we can't react in a tight way. We're going to lose nearly 1 million people. Whereas other countries like Taiwan or China, which are tight countries where none of us would want to live because there are no civil rights, no freedom of the press, no religious freedom. But a tight system can react in a way that can tap down a pandemic. So social dynamics and how they're being discussed in models of the future is how do we become ambidextrous, right hand, left hand on tight systems and loose systems. So we can be loose when we need to be and tight when we need to be, and it doesn't end up with these extremes of reaction that my freedoms are being taken away by vaccines or even by seatbelts, or next might be traffic lights. They're taking away my freedom. So those are my comments, and I'm really happy then to see what everyone else has to say.
Well, thank you, Kurt. Yeah, that was great and interesting about the tight freedoms and tight countries and tight systems and loose systems. Okay, so up next, Michael Wayne, who is a PhD and has other credentials, is a practitioner of acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and integrative medicine with over 30 years experience in the field, and is an advocate in the fields of transformation and the movement toward an evolved open culture. His expertise covers the personal, political, cultural, social, scientific, and spiritual realms. And I know, Michael, you've been doing an extended series of interviews and videos. I was on one of them, so thank you for that. And so welcome to the broadcast, Michael. What would you like to say about all of this?
Well, thank you, Rick. I want to talk about the intersection of conscious evolution, democracy, and economics. I've spent a lot of time studying economics of late, and I actually have a book coming out early part of next year on economics. But I want to just first, before my prepared statements, touch on a few things. Kurt mentioned the concept of supremacy of rich. You know, we talk about white supremacy, supremacy of rich. And Rick, you brought up the 40% of senators who represent 20% of the United States. So yeah, this is the one of the problems, big problem. And so I want to trace a little history in this. When James Madison was writing he is pretty much the father of the U.S. Constitution, was writing it, the concept in his mind always was the tyranny of the majority. He always felt the concern is we have to protect ourselves from the majority. And you'll hear this mostly from conservatives. We'll talk about the majoritarian dilemma or the problem. But really, and so the way Madison framed the Constitution really is created this tyranny of the minority, the way the Senate is set up, as you pointed out, Rick, and also, as Kurt pointed out, the supremacy of the rich. And because it was the wealthy landowners, slave owners who wrote the Constitution, and they protected their interests. And so this has led to a situation in this country, and it's created a lot of the problems of what economists call oligarchic drift. And Jane Mayer wrote an excellent article not too long ago in the New Yorker about the whole Stop the Steal, which led to the insurrection on January 6th, and has just continued. And the funding of that coming from the right-wing billionaires who funded a lot of this through dark money. And so this is a real problem. Obviously, we're all concerned about this oligarchic drift and this pretty much tyranny of the minority. And so it's created, this panel is about freedom and democracy, the future of freedom and democracy. And I would say that a big problem of this stems from, I went back in history to the Constitution, but even going back further to the writing of the Declaration of Independence, with the famous words written by Thomas F. Jefferson that we're all endowed with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Jefferson's ideas were born of the Enlightenment. He was influenced by the Greek philosophers and John Locke and all the famous Enlightenment thinkers. But what happened was, in the United States, we tie freedom with this pursuit of happiness. And so it's almost like a flaw in the way it was thought out, that if we have freedom, that's happiness. And so we've come up with this very, very immature, narcissistic version of freedom. Don't tell me I can't wear a mask or whatever. Don't tell me you're going to take my guns away, and ad nauseum. But the interesting thing, when after the American Revolution was over, Jefferson served for 4 years in the 1785 to 1789 as the ambassador to France, and there he renewed his friendship with the Marquis de Lafayette, who was a big American, the French who came to America to help the American revolutionaries. And there they teamed together to write a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And Jefferson was there when the French Revolution started. He was not involved in the writing of the US Constitution. So he probably would have not been happy about the tyranny of minority that came of it. But when the French Revolution began, there was a famous motto that then became part of their constitution, written 50 or so years later, and that most of us know the phrase, liberty, equality, fraternity. So the French version of freedom is tied in with fraternity, with brotherhood, with social cohesion, that we're all in this together, and that we all look after each other, and it's all about the greatest good. And this is a concept that is so foreign now for a certain segment of the American population, that freedom has responsibilities, that freedom is connected to the greater good, that we look after one another and make sure we're all okay, and as the French slogan and constitutional saying goes, also equality, liberty, equality, fraternity, that when one person's free, when we're all free, then one person free, all people free. So here we're marching for, people marching for these crazy things, a Stop the Steal, which made no sense, funded by the oligarchy, the supremacy of rich, as Jane Mayer pointed out, burned on, pushed by demagogic politicians. Trump's be gone. The next person, and as Rick pointed out, perhaps we're 2 national elections away from, even more concerning with oligarchic drift. And so it really was a misguided understanding of what freedom is. And so now I want to go back to, I talked about the intersection of conscious evolution, democracy, and economics. And I think the best statement that I've heard that ties those three threads together is by John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, who said, anything we can actually do, we can afford. And Keynes actually wrote that in his book, How to Pay for the War, this World War II. And he talked about the government just funds things and we can then do it. Or if we set our mind to it, we can do it, the money will be there. What has happened also, the economic part of this oligarchic drift and problems in this country is the austerity that has been pushed for almost 4 decades. And a lot of people have been screwed over by the oligarchic drift, factories that have moved overseas, the crash of Wall Street, people lost their homes, banks bailed out, people getting crumbs. And a lot of people are angry and were prey to the predators, the demagogic politicians who were willing to take advantage of them. I mean, and things were already incubating in bad shape. And then Trump just came along and took everything, moved things exponentially faster and faster. But going back to Keynes' saying, anything we can actually do, we can afford, we can end austerity, we can make a thriving, prosperous society for all. And if we adopt that mindset, it would lead to a society of abundance where the only limitations would be our imagination and creative capabilities. Keynes wrote about abundance. These aren't just kind of new agey terms talking about abundance. And Keynes talked about building a post-scarcity society, a post-scarcity economy, post-scarcity society. And scarcity is triggered into the human brain, into our brainstem, our reptilian brain. And so we have a society stuck on scarcity where, we just have tribal factions. That's where we're seeing this intense polarization. It's gotten to such a tribal faction. And in a way, it's kind of like irrational thought versus more rational thought. And a lot of it is tied in with this misguided sense of freedom and happiness. That's why I wanted to bring up Jefferson. And it's really misguided to think freedom, we can do whatever we want in the pursuit of happiness. That's not what happiness is. But a happiness that's achieved that's influenced but that's about the greatest good, that's where social cohesion occurs and true freedom takes place. And that's always been the promise and potential of democracy, a society where everybody can succeed or thrive or prosper in whatever terms they want, and have meaning in their life. And I think, again, that's tying back the intersection of conscious evolution, democracy, and economics, where we can go towards a society of abundance. And so to create that really will take a sea change, a mindset. That's where, us folks in the Evolutionary Leaders talk about consciousness change in so many different ways. And lots of people are talking about that, whether personal growth or societal growth and changing the political system and the economic system. And there's a lot of people working at trying to change the economic system, but ultimately it will take a movement from this tyranny of minority. So to go into solutions, John brought up a lot of the organizations that are working good. And I think another thing that we need is, ultimately we could use rewriting the Constitution of the United States, but really what's happened in a number of countries around the world is the Citizens Assembly movement. It's part of what's called the deliberative democracy. Stanford University has the Center for Deliberative Democracy. In 2019, they did something, I think it was called something like Americans in One Room, and they brought together 500 or so Americans who deliberated for a few days. Just people, and generally with Citizens Assembly, deliberative democracy, people are randomly selected to represent different demographics. So that was done in America. In countries around the world who've been very serious about this Citizen Assembly, they've done the same thing. It's random people are selected, I'll bring up the example of Ireland, which really had very successful with their Citizens Assembly. Somewhere in the beginning of the 2010s, middle, the movement started, and they randomly selected 100 people to come together. It was about 1 week and a month. The meetings were live streamed. Anybody could watch and submit questions or comments, be part of it. And from that came referendums on constitutional or national issues, national referendums. And it was because of that Ireland changed their constitution because of the Citizens Assembly. They changed their constitution to allow for gay marriage in 1 year, and then another year referendum on abortion. And that was major on a predominantly Catholic country to approve both gay marriage and abortion. And they continue with the Citizens Assembly. It's just every year they select a new one. So I think this is what America needs: a Citizens Assembly to start deliberating, having deliberative democracy to discuss the issues and start putting forward what we're going to do. Taiwan did a version of that, what they call virtual Taiwan. And that also, with the help of some good government hackers, so to speak, their country also became transformed. And so this deliberative democracy and citizen assemblies are things to create a more direct democracy, because this is another of the big problems in this country, this indirect democracy where we elect a representative who hopefully is going to represent our point of view, but they're more representing the as Kurt called it, supremacy of the rich. The money talks in politics, and that's what gets its way. And so, you know, we all understand things like climate change have to be addressed now. The timetable is slipping away. And so that's what I want to put forth, this as a solution, the citizen assembly. And these are role models that have been done numerous countries around the world. I think there's the International Center for Deliberative Democracy. It is in Australia, but all these organizations are connected in one way or another. So that's my piece.
All right, right. Thank you, Michael. And I was glad that when you were talking about France and liberté, égalité, and fraternité, and you also talk about social cohesion, because that is, for me, that's one of the key pieces that we are talking about in We the World, making that shift towards we consciousness and the common good, which is, and that's you know, one of the ways to one of the solutions to, you know, making that cultural shift. And I also wanted to kind of bring out this idea of we is an expanded concept. So, you know, there's a little bit of a dynamic of us versus them on this panel, which is understandable, because if you're interested in the common good, and some groups are kind of fighting that, it feels like a dynamic of us versus them. But on the other hand, we all share the same needs, psychological and physical needs, right? I mean, so there are ways, I mean, I guess you can kind of look at it in different perspectives, but, you know, theoretically, we means everyone, and not just people. You know, we is an expanded concept of the, you know, animals, plants, the ecosystems that support life. You know, it's an expanded concept of we. And I think it's also valid to look at situations that come up where people, particular people or groups, are not doing things that support the common good. So it's you know, it's a back and forth dynamic. You know, the concept of transpartisan, like you were talking about, John, really, it's not bipartisan. It's like beyond, you know, it's like going beyond that whole thing. And yet we can also be critical of dynamics that do not support a movement towards transpartisan politics and fraternity and social cohesion. But anyway, I just want to bring that up as a dynamic. And with that, let's bring in our next speaker, Bob Atkinson. Robert Atkinson, PhD, author, educator, and developmental psychologist, is an internationally recognized authority on life story interviewing, a pioneer in the techniques of personal myth making and soul making, and is deeply committed to the global movements of our time, specifically the global movement of building a culture of oneness. And you have a big forum coming up, right, Bob? You can talk about that as well.
Thanks so much, Rick, and Kurt for bringing this panel together. Yeah, if we have a minute at some point, I could say a little bit about the One Planet Peace Forum coming up this weekend. But we've got such a rich amount of what incredible information to deal with here already. Thanks, John, for all those great resources, and Michael for the historic and economic context for it all. And Rick, what you were just saying about we kind of reminded me, or made me think that in one way, we is a shortening of, or the beginning of and the end of whole. And that's what it's really all about. You know, we're talking about the whole and all of its aspects, which create polarization. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk for a few minutes about here is how, is from a big picture perspective, how if we look at the whole first, how we can recognize all the parts within the whole and not necessarily see them as polarizations, but as differences with gradations. And I'll get to that in a minute. But so the polarization in the title that we're using for this, facing the US democracy, is political, and it's more than political. It's part of a larger process that transcends democracy. We're in the midst of a process meant to bring about a transformation that will facilitate a leap of consciousness. So from a holistic perspective, polarization is a normal part of the cyclical processes of the entire physical universe and is always supported by natural laws. Every society has polarization built in. What we're seeing now in the US, though, is an extreme expression of the clash of opposites. As surveys show, Americans are more divided along partisan lines now than at any point in the last 3 decades. Current dangers to democracy are real. Our focus today is on freedom, which is the foundation of democracy. The January 6th attacks on the Capitol, one of the most extreme expressions of polarization this country has ever seen, were an abuse of freedom. Yesterday's support of that act of insurrection shows there are still those who are guided by what Kurt and others have called counterfactual narratives, in which they think this is a post-truth world that we're living in. So does yesterday's smaller turnout mean that we have reached a turning point in this polarization? We'll see. But 159 years ago this week, after the Battle of Antietam, the lowest point in the Civil War, while the Confederate soldiers were fighting to create a new nation based on white supremacy, the Emancipation Proclamation declaring the freedom of slaves was issued, and the Union soldiers rallied to bring the Civil War to an end. America may be at another antietam moment. The idea of white supremacy is still not defeated, but the evolutionary odds are that we will rally again to overcome so-called post-truth era false narratives around this insurrection, which are literally the opposite of the truth. What has already had legal consequences as an abuse of freedom is being reframed as defending freedom. So freedom is a double-edged sword, meant to nurture the best in us, but it often allows the worst in us to emerge as well. True freedom, designed to lift up the whole, has not been easy to achieve. In a democracy built upon the principles of inclusion, equal treatment, and equal participation, overstepping one's bounds of freedom has taken away the freedom of others, resulting in unjust treatment of many. The checks and balances of freedom are being tested. For the promise of democracy to bring the principle of equality for people of all races, ethnicities, and genders into reality, we all need to be willing to be shaped by fact-based debate rather than countering with false narratives. The real danger facing democracy right now is that we have a significant minority of Americans holding on for their lives to a self-centered adolescent consciousness built on the illusion of separation. At the same time, we have a slim majority committed to continuing our evolutionary trajectory toward our collective maturity with a consciousness of oneness. This is what really polarizes us. Fortunately, and with perfect timing, so much of the danger to democracy right now depends upon the Freedom to Vote Act, which was just released by the Senate this week. The future is yet to be determined by us. This extreme polarization within democracy means that we are in the midst of a crisis of consciousness. A holistic perspective sees apparent divisions as differences of gradation, all existing within the same whole. The whole can be seen as a continuum in which all states of consciousness are already interconnected like links in a chain, with all things sharing the same conditions. One side of this consciousness continuum is guided by a consciousness of duality, creating hierarchies, building systems of injustice, leading us through stereotyping, discrimination, violence, and ending up with genocide and war, endangering our very survival. The other side of the continuum is guided by a consciousness of wholeness, which moves us from respect for difference and compassion for all toward universal human rights, gender and economic equity, and social, racial, and climate justice, all interconnected stepping stones to peace. From this perspective of consciousness as a continuum, all things are seen as interconnected aspects of one reality. This gives us the consciousness principle, which says consciousness is a potentiality that evolves toward wholeness and unity. Yet this potential depends totally upon the initiative we take to investigate reality on our own. The freedom to search for truth is what expands our consciousness. The inherent potential of consciousness does not fulfill itself automatically or blindly. It takes a conscious effort for consciousness to reach its fullest potential. Realizing this principle in our collective life may be the greatest antidote to the current flood of false narratives and to this not becoming a post-truth world. Not to realize this principle would not only threaten democracy further, but also threaten our collective evolution of consciousness. Polarization will not be solved by eliminating the polarities, but by narrowing the degree of differences between them. Opposing forces are not only fundamental to democracy, but also to the evolutionary impulse itself. The way this plays out is through the transformation principle, which says opposition is a catalyst for transformation. In other words, the conscious confrontation of opposing forces, as we're seeing now, sets in motion a process of transformation which merges the opposites into a greater unity. This is where we are now. Today's polarizations will one day be merged into a greater wholeness. So what are some of the takeaways to address the polarizations we're facing? Here are a few to consider. We need to learn moderation to reach our collective stage of maturity. We have to consciously want the benefit of one to be the benefit of all. The flow of evolution doesn't just happen in a straight line. It doesn't go straight up or straight down. It goes in cycles that are transformative and progressive. There are millions of people who are committed to the principles of democracy. It is in our power to make this the turning point in the battle against false narratives and for principles of inclusion and equality. Our individual and collective potential is embedded within our spiritual DNA. There are forces beyond us guiding us to our fullest potential. We are the catalysts needed to move the evolutionary impulse onward. Thanks.
All right, Bob. We are the ones we've been waiting for, is the last thing that you said, really, right?
Right.
So thank you. And I wanted to mention, John, that Angel has offered to post any links that you want to share. If you put them in the chat, Angel will add them to the Facebook page in the comments. So as we do our final go-arounds, if you want to do that, then you can actually, Angel will add those to the event that we're doing now on Facebook, and that can be shared with everybody. So, so one thing I'd like to do is maybe have reactions by each person, brief, and then at the end of anything that you'd like to say, what is your call to action? So John, can we start with you? We'll kind of go in the same order that we went, and then you know, any reaction to anything that you've heard, and what is your final call to action as we wind up?
I learned a lot being with you guys. It was great. To each of you. Michael, I will say America's in One Room literally is doing it again this weekend, and I'll send you something. And the piece that I didn't say that I will put in is that a man named Olaf Scholz is the Social Democratic Party's candidate for chancellor in the coming election in Germany. And he is offering a new kind of populism based on dignity and respect. And there's an article that I'll share at least with the panelists. We'll see if it can go out more broadly. It's very encouraging. Thank you all.
Okay, well, I wrote down 3 things while we were talking, and I'll just say them very briefly.
Go for it, Kurt. Thank you.
That it's important that people know why false narratives and conspiracy theories are attractive. And it's because they have a short-term adaptive value. In other words, you think you know something, you've put it all in a nutshell, you've figured it out, you know, blah, blah, blah. So they have a short-term adaptive value, and so they're very attractive, but they always dead end, and then because they're not true. And so then the question is, at what expense? So if you look at Nazism in Germany, that lie, that counterfactual narrative persisted for 20 years, and it dead ended, but after 90 million people were dead. So the other one is that everything we're talking about here, and it also reflects this whole question of false narratives and counterfactual narratives, is that it's all about conscious choice. We could have the freedom as a species on this planet to believe the craziest things that would actually mess up our abilities to make any intelligent decisions. And that would just run us, right off the end of evolutionary history. But that would come down to what we actually chose to believe is true. So this is not a small matter. And then just to summarize that, I talked about all these sociologists that were talking about tight and loose. Another thing that they're talking about is that in evolution and ecology, where something comes along that completely destroys all the norms, like when the meteor hit the Yucatan and then it ended up in wiping out the dinosaurs because the whole balance of everything was thrown off. These sociologists are saying is that the power of counterfactual narratives is exactly that same way. They call that catastrophe, when something comes in and completely upends any set of norms and throws things into complete disarray. So they are thinking now on an evolutionary basis that the problem with counterfactual narratives is a catastrophe. So those comments.
And thank you, Kurt. And do you have a call to action, and or do you want to give some contact points, websites, maybe for the magazine or Convergence Radio or something like that?
Yeah, I'll put those in chat, but I want to harken back to all of the groups that you've mentioned and John has mentioned, because I'm not a Debbie Downer. I just going on this evolutionary principle of don't declaw the cat. One of the weaknesses in the spiritual community is we're so good to everybody, we let people get by with murder because we're always trying to be nice. But at a certain point, if you declaw the cat, and this is a term in pro-social theory, then you no longer can even insist or enforce on even what's factually true. So we just have to be, to be aware of all of those sites and movements that John and others have mentioned, and also that our younger generation has to realize that we are in a different era now. We are in an era now where we have enfranchised political parties that actually are willing to not have a democracy if they can get what they want. And that's unprecedented.
Okay. Next, Michael Wayne.
Yeah. Hey, Rick. I got a couple points too. Want to follow up with Kurt talking about just our conspiracy minded people. This is nothing new in America. Goes back to the start of the American experiment with conspiracy theories. But in 1964, the historian Richard Hofstadter wrote a famous essay called "The Paranoid Style in American Politics," because it was starting to rear its head again. I mean, in the 1950s, we had McCarthyism. And then 1964 he wrote that because Barry Goldwater was the presidential nominee for the Republicans, and his views were very extreme. His views now are kind of the mainstream Republican Party. But so this paranoid mindset has been around a long time, and it's just thanks to demagogues, certain media like Fox News, and then social media, it's gone haywire. So Kurt Vonnegut kind of addressed this in his unique, whimsical, farcical style, this paranoid mindset, through his alter ego Kilgore Trout, in a supposed book that Kilgore Trout wrote called "Protocol of the Elders of Tralfamadore." And this was a takeoff on the famous conspiracy-laden purported document that turned out to be a fraud, Protocol of the Elders of Zion, which claimed there was a Jewish conspiracy that this came out at the end of the 19th century that was running the world. Henry Ford believed it was true and printed hundreds of thousands of copies to give out to people. And Hitler in the 1930s had school children study this fake document, Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But Kurt Vonnegut, through Kilgore Trout, wrote Protocol of the Elders of Tralfamadore. And in that story, there was a planet near, there was the planet of Tralfamadore, and there was a planet near there where in the story goes that there were a bunch of elders whose job was to control all the Tralfamadorians to get them to do what these people, elders, wanted on this planet. But it never worked because the Tralfamadorians were just thought it was ridiculous. Nobody can control anybody. And so they just scoffed it off, and kind of an enlightened viewpoint to say, there is nobody controlling us. We are free human beings. This is the Tralfamadorians saying, we are free to do what we want. So if only in our present state, this victimization that fuels conspiracy thinking can let it rest, because that's such a thing that, you know, the white supremacists feel they're the ones victimized. And it just goes on, this victimization. Donald Trump was like the king of victimhood, and king of grievances. So that's one thing. And then this polarization really, John touched on it when he talked about options for how we change our electoral process, like ranked choice voting. But really what we need is to copy, the role models there, copy every developed nation in the world, because the United States is the only developed nation in the world that has a two-party system, a duopoly. We need a multi-party system. The United States probably has right now about 5 or 6 political parties. We have the far right, the Christian right, the center right, the center left, progressives, and probably a Green Party. And usually in all these other countries, it's generally coalition governments that come together and representing various points of views. Sometimes it's social democrats and Greens, as happened in Germany. Austria had the center right and the Green Party. I think there's still the coalition government there. So this is another part of how the needs that need to change, what needs to change. And the United States really is a majority liberal progressive country, you know, where all the various issues, the social issues that we face, from choice to gun control, all these things, all these common sense things, really majority of people want them. And it's just, again, I use the term Turian minority, but we really need a big change in our system. And John, I'm glad to hear that that there was America in One Room is starting up again, because these types of deliberative democracy and citizen democracies are needed. And then one other thing I'll just add about kind of democracy and economics. In the 1930s, with the Great Depression, the United States did a very bold experiment when Franklin Roosevelt became president and put forth the New Deal legislation. Roosevelt was such a consummate politician and skilled and knew what to do the right thing. He wrested control from the banks and had monetary policy, tied it with fiscal policy. And so there was so much government money that went to the greater good. You know, unemployment was started, Social Security was started, civilian conservation corps was started, worker programs, people were employed. And what happened when Roosevelt went for re-election in 1936, the banks were against him, the Republican Party was against him, majority of media in the United States was against him, all the special interests and money interests were lined up against him. But the one thing Roosevelt had his side was the people. People were so, Carl Sandburg wrote a book called The People, Yes, in like 1935 or 36. And that really represented how people felt, in that people were, the regular people of this country, for the first time in a long time, were treated as royalty. And so when Roosevelt went up for re-election, he won in a landslide. And he was up against Alf Landon, the governor of Kansas, or former governor of Kansas, and even Kansas voted for Roosevelt. So once again, I talked about that quote from Keynes, that we can do whatever, we can do anything, and we have the money to do it. Roosevelt proved that. And that's, again, when this tyranny minority ends, just like Biden's $3.5 trillion, not Biden, but the Biden administration's $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation, public program, infrastructure, it has been said, the greatest influx of capital for the common good since the New Deal. And we all need to agitate to see that passed. It's going to, if it passes, it will be just the Democrats passing on a budget reconciliation bill. But that's the kind of thing that will make so many people happy, fulfilled, and can help bridge that divide in all the people who are living by the conspiracies and all the anger and grievances, because they just want to be heard. We all want to be heard. And that's like Americans in one room. Everybody wants to listen and hear each other and hear their stories. And so in a way, a lot of this is geared towards a healing of Americans, to realize this fraternity, social cohesion, that we're all in it together. So.
Exactly. And Michael, do you want to give a contact point where people can connect with you?
Well, I can give my email address. It's M Wayne, first initial, last name, at mac.com, like the computer. Sorry, MWayne2, number 2, at mac.com. My website is drmichaelwayne.com. My book, which has 2 different working titles. One is called Beyond the Pandemic Toward a More Perfect Union. And the other one is, the other working title is Economics for Lovers Towards a More Perfect Union. It won't be out till the winter. And once that starts, I will be mobilizing a website and a movement. I'm planning to initiate a citizen assembly myself, if need be, with other people, of course. But anyway, so hopefully that contact info is good.
Okay.
You're Rick.
That's great. Let us all know when you initiate that citizens assembly.
Yeah.
That's an idea that we've been talking about for a long time, actually. People's assembly is another way of putting it that's been bandied around quite a bit. So Bob, any thoughts, and what is your call to action, and how can people connect, especially regarding your forum that's coming up?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. This has been such a rich panel discussion and so much for people to take in and refer back to for a long time. I hope everybody can follow up on finding the sources of all these resources. And there's another one coming up this weekend. The weekend after International Day of Peace, we are having our 2nd annual One Planet Peace Forum. And it's just got an incredible list of speakers and some rising star peace builders as well. And so I'll just encourage you to go to oneplanetpeaceforum.org to check it all out and to register. It's this coming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday online. There's just been so much. I don't think I really have anything to add to everything that's been said. I would just, I did think a little bit about a call to action, and there's so much, I'm sure that when people do track down these resources, and there'll be so many more calls to action and those, but mine would be just to kind of maybe sum up some of what we've talked about today would be: stick to the facts, live by the universal truths in the world's wisdom traditions, look first on all things with the eye of wholeness, participate with your heart and your inner voice in the discourses of the day, call always upon higher guidance available to all.
Well, there you go. That sounds beautiful. So this has been really amazing. What a cornucopia of information. And I think we achieved our goal for all of our sessions during 11 days and in general for We the World, to inspire, inform, and involve. 3 I's that make a we, so we can go from a me-based society to a we-based society. There you go. It's all about we, right? So thank you all. And if you want to get more information about all of these other 11 days events or connect, we.net, one of the easiest web addresses to remember on the internet, we.net. Thank you all, and bye-bye.